Welcome, everyone. I'm Danny Warshay. I'm the Executive Director of the Jonathan M. Nelson Center for Entrepreneurship. Really excited that you're all with us today. Those of you who are familiar with our programming know that I always start these events with the following question. For how many of you is this the first time you've been to a Nelson Center for Entrepreneurship event? Awesome. I always love seeing that. Really happy to see all the new faces. To all of you, we're really thrilled that you're with us for the first time. We hope it will not be the last time. We encourage you, if you have not done so already, to go to our website, which is entrepreneurship.brown.edu, couldn't be easier, and sign up for our periodic email update. It'll keep you in the loop on these kinds of events, and it'll give you a little bit of background about the underpinnings of what the center represents. For those of you who are familiar with our events, I hope you'll continue to come. And you all know what I'm going to sketch out briefly, which is that our center is focused on everything related to entrepreneurship in the entire Brown ecosystem. And that includes curricular, so that's courses that we're teaching, professors that we're hiring, academic research that we're sponsoring. So there's a very rigorous academic underpinning to everything we're doing. The second is co-curricular, so these kinds of events. We're bringing lots of alumni and functional experts to campus to do workshops, to speak, to hold office hours, to mentor. And then I like to say that we're not only teaching people about entrepreneurship, we're empowering them to do it. So we have a whole layer of what we call venture support, and that is in the form of increasing amounts of grant funding. We have a summer accelerator that many of you know, some of you have participated in, called B-Lab. In fact, we're starting the new cycle for applications for B-Lab real soon. We have a program called Peer Entrepreneurs in Residence. So that's 11 experienced undergrads who are mentoring and fellowing other aspiring entrepreneurs. And then we are going to be soon kicking off a venture prize competition that you'll be hearing more about soon. So a whole variety of resources that are geared to enable you, to empower you to take some venture steps, not just to learn about entrepreneurship, but to do it. So if you're interested in learning more, please go to our website, entrepreneurship.brown.edu. I'm really excited to welcome back to campus. I don't know how often that happens in your case now that I'm sure you're in big demand around the world, but back to the friendly confines of Brunonia to share with us a little bit about your journey, about what you're doing now, maybe some connections between what you did when you were not too long ago in these very seats in Barris and Holly or Wilson or Alumni Hall, and to what you're doing now. So Luke was a former student of mine. I'm really proud to say, and we may even draw on some of those angles today. Neil was not a student directly, but we knew each other well when you were on campus, and also we said we would disclose that you were not only an undergrad, but you were a plebe.
I was, yeah.
So I hear you say you were. I guess you're not.
I am for life.
You are for life. I don't know if you're holding that medical school spot open, depending on what you end up doing beyond Casper, but who knows. And I do want to touch a little bit on how your backgrounds at Brown may have influenced your trajectory. But I thought I might dive into where some people already know, maybe some others don't, about where you guys are right now in your trajectory. What's the status of Casper? Maybe a little bit of background about how you've gotten here. And then we'll rewind the tape and get back to what it was like in 2009 when I first got to know Luke. So is that a reasonable place to start? Maybe just tell the quick update on what you're doing and a little bit of the origin story.
Okay. Has anyone heard of Casper before? Well, makes it a little bit easier. Well, I mean, we sell mattresses, so. So we started 3.5 years ago, or launched about 3.5 years ago, with the dream of trying to figure out how do we, small vision, make buying a mattress a less crappy experience. Big picture, how do we build a brand that's really focused on sleep and inspiring people to invest in that, and furthermore to essentially make your life a lot better through investing in sleep. So today we're about almost 350 people. We're in 11 countries, I think 10 or 11 countries. We're mainly based in New York. We have an R&D team in San Francisco, an international office in Berlin. And in the last 2 years, we've really been diversifying. So you might know us for our mattresses, which come out of a box, kind of like those dinosaur toys. But we've been spending a lot of time thinking about what are the other products that you need throughout the course of your life when you're sleeping. So whether it's pillows, sheets, other things that are in your bedroom, and trying to figure out how do we design best-in-class versions of those to really improve how you rest. So, what did I miss?
I mean, I think that's a good update.
So thinking about sleep and maybe Casper as a platform for other things you might do related to that same
totally.
topic.
I mean, yeah, go for it.
I guess one of the big things for Casper is when we originally raised money, it was one of the big questions you had is mattress companies don't think of lifetime value in a customer. There's not really an incentive for a mattress company to have a relationship with a customer. They typically sell through a third party, so they're already separated by one partner. And then you have a 7 to 8 year replacement cycle. So in business terms, when a lot of public businesses are thinking in the quarter, they're not thinking on the 8-year customer relationship. And there's a kind of an inbuilt structural disincentive to work on lifetime value in that customer relationship. With Casper, our approach, in 4 years, so less than half of the average mattress, or about half of the average mattress replacement cycle. We've only existed for half of our core products replacement cycle. We've been trying to build a lifetime value, like real deep relationship with a customer, where you kind of flip the mental model from, here's a thing that I buy and hopefully forget about for a while, to I now have a partner for all my sleep needs and can really invest into my sleep environment with a partner that I trust. And we really structurally organize our business around how do we ensure that for each product we have a high net promoter score. For those of you familiar, it's like propensity for someone to refer to another friend, and really try to seek growing each of our customers to have a full ecosystem of our products. We also design that way. So we design our products to work together to build a low humidity, highly breathable, supportive sleep environment, and they're kind of ecosystemic in that way.
I love hearing you reference lifetime value, because you may remember in the course you took with me back in 2009, I think, that we dealt with customer acquisition and lifetime value. And the students from my course who are here today, I hope are paying attention, because we're at the part of the venture development process where we're introducing that. And so to hear it in real life be relevant is important for me, is even trying to teach this stuff, because sometimes people look at it and say, oh yeah, I kind of know the math, but does it really matter? And so it sounds like, at least in the way you're conceiving your business, it really does matter.
Yeah, I think there's a huge structural advantage to having a lifetime value, where you can take, if you can, with data, and we have partial insight into our data because we don't have that full 8 years of data of one replacement cycle, so some of this is guesswork. But if you can have certainty that you're going to have a customer who's going to interact with your brand in a certain type of way based on small data sets, and have an assumption of lifetime value, you can start to bring some of those future dollars forward into your customer acquisition budget. And that lets you compete with folks who don't have those same dynamics, and essentially have a structural advantage at that point of getting new customers. It's a big deal, despite it feeling like one of these little technicalities that doesn't necessarily play out other than as a brand. And for us, it's a big priority. I think you'll see generally for our cohort, not just us, but our many emulators, that there's a structural advantage to this, having someone's email, having a product portfolio that will shift the market from being offline to online automatically.
I think, to your point, and to Luke's, the thing I never appreciated when we started the company was that most companies that sell stuff are just a math equation. You're for the most part just thinking about what does something cost to make? What does it cost to market that item? And then how many people do you have, simplifying this a lot, right? But if those things get out of whack, you essentially start losing a ton of money. And if they're in line, you start making a ton of money, right? And so most of our marketing team, I always thought marketing people, we write blog posts and, do communication stuff. And internally, it's actually mostly a hedge fund, right? They're mostly quants who sit there and think about, okay, I'm deploying $1, how am I getting an ROI of $3, $4, $5, $6, hopefully, as a return on it? And that allows you to actually do a lot of really cool things, because instead of just like spending blind into the eternity, you can go and say, okay, we are going to spend money on something like the subway campaigns in New York, which if you've been to New York, you may have seen, but have confidence that, hey, it's actually working and we should double down and keep spending on it.
So there's there is a quantitative side to this, and a quantitative side to marketing. It's not just blog posts and designing an ad. I remember one time early on when we were discussing this, I think Luke and I, that your approach to this and your acknowledgement that you didn't really know much about if anything, about the mattress industry worked to your advantage. And it reminded me of one of the approaches to teaching entrepreneurship that at least I use, and I think in general we espouse at the center and maybe overall for Brown, was that there's a benefit to scarce resources, and of all kinds. And sometimes, and I use Casper as a really good example these days, I hope I'm honest about this, you can correct me if I'm not, but that your scarce resource of expertise in this industry worked to your advantage. You didn't know the rules, so you didn't know that you were breaking them, you didn't know you were supposed to follow them, you didn't have a legacy business you had to protect. You could start from scratch with a blank slate and acknowledge you don't really know much about the mattress business. Maybe you slept on one, but not that much more.
Yeah.
And so could you talk a little bit about that? Because I think there's a lot of people represented today, not just my students, but I know others throughout Brown, who on one hand may be feeling a little stymied because they don't have a deep expertise in a particular field. But I think it's such a great example of, in fact, not just neutral, but an advantage sometimes to not know the rules because you don't know if you're breaking them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely true for us. I think that, you in conjunction with that benefit, you make a lot of mistakes. But one of the things I go back to, is this where Engine 90 is taught? This classroom. So this is where Neil and I met. I think.
So poetic.
Yeah. One of the things I go back to is when you graduate college, you kind of have you have an asset that you might not perceive as an asset, and that is kind of a understanding of what your generation expects, or what sort of the modes of communication are. This is stating the obvious, but you might not compute that in sort of like the value that you bring to a venture as being that meaningful. You might give it a single digit. I understand, how I like to SMS for customer service, and you might give that like 2 points of value. And you might put an incredible amount of value on understanding the mattress supply chain, and you might put, say, 40 points on that value. I think what we found was the stuff that makes you stand out, the stuff that has made us break through the noise, is recognizing the value of the asset that you graduate with, which is just essentially an intuitive sense of what your expectation is for customer interactions. I don't think this applies necessarily to building a B2B business. It doesn't necessarily apply to building businesses that aren't in categories where there's a real human element or human sort of like part of the interaction. But for us, so much of what we did with Casper was sort of like, traditional mattresses do 30-day return policies, and we reframed return policy as a trial, not because we wanted to not because necessarily we just knew that was awesome or anything. It was just like that's what felt intuitive to us. And I don't know if I'm flipping your question a little bit,
That's
but
great.
I think it's kind of the part that I really do believe is that when you graduate, you probably undervalue, if you're thinking of a consumer business, you undervalue a ton of learning that you've made just by interacting with the folks around you about expectations for how you would want to communicate with an enterprise. I mean, there's even just self-awareness. Like, I think most people who graduate from Brown don't expect the communication of commerce to be as in the language of business. Like it's almost like something that we hide. There's a human-centered, intuitive aspect of that, and we did that naturally with Casper. We kind of hid the fact that it was unconsciously hid the fact that this was to Neil's point, a kind of a math equation as a company, and layered it much more in the humanist learnings that we had from graduating Brown.
Yeah, I think for me, like the one thing I did learn, I did a year of med school at Brown before Luke convinced me to move to New York and join the dark side. But I think the one thing I did learn from both was just how to learn very quickly, because like in any business that you go into, you're not going to know very much about this, right? We knew nothing about customer acquisition, nothing about PR, nothing about mattresses. Like, I don't think we knew anything about anything other than how to hustle and convince people to give us some sort of money. Like, we won second place in the businessman competition at the time, and like we were just trying to fight for scraps so that we could move to New York and like live on, you know, we were paying ourselves like, I don't know, $300 a month to like eat $5 sandwiches and stuff.
A little more than that. But
500, whatever it was, right? But the point was that the key thing I think I learned at Brown was just figure out very quickly how to learn new things. And then secondly, if there are things that are difficult to learn, go and find people who are experts and convince them to help you, right? And so early on, like when we were designing the mattress, like we didn't actually know how to design a mattress, but by sheer luck, my best friend from med school, her fiance was an industrial designer at IDEO. And so we called up Jeff and said, hey Jeff, like I don't know anyone else who like remotely knows how to design a product. Do you know how to make a mattress? So happened that Jeff had worked on a bunch of bedding projects at IDEO because they were former clients, and he was actually super passionate about sleep, and so he teamed up with us. And so then very quickly, okay, we said, now we have someone who knows about a product development process. Well, right at launch, we realized earned media is going to be super important, but we didn't know how to get press. And so our first couple of hires were like someone who's an amazing PR person, an amazing acquisition marketing person, because like there's two approaches, right? You can either say, I'm going to learn everything because I'm super important and I know everything, or you can take the opposite approach, is like have some humility and say like, I probably don't know anything. Let's just go and find people who are going to teach us. And I think one of the, you know, that's remained true to this day. Like we've always tried to hire people that are smarter than us or know more than us, and at least try to be humble about that, because it ends up being a really cool learning exercise throughout the process where you get to work with like people who are best in class in their topic and teach you about their domain.
I would just add, Neil had a super skill early on, which was the ability, or just the default to write an email to someone who was a long shot to respond to. You know, it's this kind of thing of like, you know, a lot of us in our head, I'm guilty of it, will think, you know, you have a 15% chance of response on this email that I'm sending. Is it worth my time? And Neil defaulted to it's always worth his time. And I think actually like started to build a culture of us doing that as a cohort. And Jeff is a perfect example, like our partner in this business, of someone that if I had been in his shoes, I probably wouldn't have shot the email. And I think like there's that mindset of like overleaping on who you reach out to. That there's way more people willing to help than you expect, and if you're willing to accept the rejection of someone not responding, but still kind of have that strategy, it's totally worth it. I think it's like, for me, we probably don't credit it with that much of our early success, but there's so many folks who helped us off of cold emails, not warm introductions. They were long shot cold emails.
So I think I'm hearing there's a balance then between some issues where your intuition was primary, and you as a 22-year-old at that time brought a different perspective to an old industry. You were humanizing the math part of it, and you had a sense of communication. There were other issues on which you acknowledged, and I'm not sure how you distinguish, that's kind of an interesting question too, I hope, that there were others where you realized you needed some expertise. People like this contact at IDEO, or other people who knew things that you didn't know, and you acknowledged you really do need to know them. So how did you sort between those two categories? There's some where I think you're saying, maybe that was intuition too, and you didn't really pay much attention to really thinking too much about it, but I hear there's two. There's one where you acknowledge intuitively that you don't need to know the rules and the way it's always done, and then there's another category you said, nah, we better learn the way it should be done.
I think as a founder of a company, your job is generally speaking to be, unless you're a technical co-founder in which you're gonna, you're obviously you have to know a lot about the subject matter. As a generalist, you need to learn quickly, figure out how to hire very quickly, and then set them working in the right direction, right? And so like, we always joke, like we need to know enough to be dangerous, right? Like if we're talking about performance marketing, I need to know all the metrics, understand how to dig into a spreadsheet. Doesn't mean that you actually have to know how to deploy the money or think about it. And so I think we just tried to dig into each of our business units and figure out like, so that you can understand what the key priorities are and help people on that front. But I think there's also like a lot of revisionist history here, right? Like I could look back on our journey and say, oh yeah, we knew that we were supposed to hire a PR person and a acquisition marketing person first. Like we also got lucky, right?
Stumbled into it.
We went on LinkedIn and said like, marketing, like who pops up, find some smart people, message them and said, we've got an idea. And so I think you also stumble into a lot of things.
Mm-hmm. And you have to be open to that, and not. too resistant, it sounds like, either to take a risk. Even the risk of hitting send on an email, which we sometimes overplay as too big of a risk. It's not that risky to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'll even look back in history a little bit. I took the liberty of, people who are here, who are my students, know that in order to get into my class, you have to write a personal statement. You have to tell me why you want to take the class, what do you want to get out of it. And most people don't know that these things live on forever. But I happened to find the personal statement applying for my class from a certain Luke Sherwin. And one of the things you said in there is, I've always assumed that learning how to spot the value in an idea or a business is one of the greatest skills an entrepreneur can have. So thinking back, and maybe it's stumbling or learning, who knows, but I'm curious if you still believe that. Do you think that that's true? Do you feel like you've honed that skill one way or the other?
I think we'd tweak it a little bit.
That's good. That means that in 8 years you've learned something. And so.
I think I think ideas are there's probably like an often repeated tech platitude of ideas are like not that valuable until the execution. I do think they're both valuable. I think a really a useful skill is to have a gut sense of what people want. I think if I was to think of like what we like for Casper, if you think of the company has many facets that are right in front of customers, to have a gut sense of what is someone feeling, what drives them, what their incentives are, I would say that is more important than the business model or idea to get there. If you could average out all decisions, to me that's the more valuable skill. I don't know if you would agree with me on that.
I think so. I think sometimes so Luke and I had started 4 or 5 pseudo companies together before we got into Casper.
I'm glad you raised that issue.
Company is like we put together a pitch deck and we claim we invented Groupon before there was Groupon, and we had lots of great ideas. But I think sometimes we'd over-focus on, at least I made this mistake, working on Consign, for example, around focusing on very technical things that you can get done, or the operational stuff, right? So I remember being obsessed with figuring out what is the perfect way to incorporate our company. And I read 5,000 pages of legal documents, I went through the whole thing, and I was like, listen, I've done all the tax filings, this, that, whatever. And looking back on it, right, in the grand scheme of things, if you're going to be successful, it's because you know what people want and you can figure out how to give them that. The technical stuff is important, but that's not what provides leverage in the business and the scale, right? You have to, at the core thing, you've got to make something that people want, or you've got to make something and then figure out how to get people to desire what you want. But that's what you should be focusing 100% of your time on.
Wow, I'm sure my students who are gathered here, maybe others who've heard us talk about this in workshops and others at the center, know that resonates with the first step in the entrepreneurial process that we teach, which is finding and validating an unmet need. And doing that through this technique of bottom-up research that we teach, so that you can detect, perhaps even in a consumer who doesn't her or himself know what they want, something about their needs. And it sounds like that's a pretty important thing that you were able to tap into eventually, maybe in business number 5, even if you didn't do it perfectly in 1 through 4.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting is just because it's the word that jumps to my head is client as a concept in business to business or B2C businesses. In some categories, your idea or your model can be measured financially, but typically it always comes back to you've met sort of a need for efficiency. Someone wants to do something quicker, or there's always as long as you're dealing with humans who have the credit cards, there's at some end of this process you may have reinvented the wheel or built an incredible compression algorithm, but they all come down to this human final buck, if you will. And I think it's interesting because there's with consumer companies now, it's almost we're guilty of contributing to it. Sorry, I'm hitting this and I'm supposed to screen the video. There's a lot of companies that are built on the premise of a business model, a cleaner business model like subscription, where you have an amazing lifetime value equation if it works, but I'm sometimes a little bit cynical or skeptical about a lot of the kind of brands on top of basic utilities as long-term businesses if you're not really tackling a real pain point or a real need. There's a lot of I think we were lucky to pick a category where mattresses are such a large investment that there is real consideration. There's a lot of canvas to solve in terms of the human need there, and there's a lot of desire versus, say for example, solving how to provide cheaper toothbrushes on a subscription model. Like there's just a little bit more challenge. And so I look at it as like when you look at opportunity, it's not just about the model, it's about how much kind of runway do you have in the like customer pain that you can solve or the customer desire that you can solve. And like some ideas don't necessarily have enough runway and they could think bigger about runway. Not to be critical about ideas for this.
Well, maybe be critical if you would with your prior businesses. Do you think they didn't live up to those kinds of standards?
Model first, yeah.
Yeah.
Now you talk about that.
Now you talk about it.
We started a three-sided marketplace. It was beautiful. After there was like a chicken or egg problem, chicken, egg, and like skillet problem of like how do you start this company? The idea was it was called Consigned, and let's say I have a vintage watch and I want to sell it, I would be able to consign it to a watch expert online with an audience versus just put it on eBay. So the idea was to provide expertise and context to a lot of the goods that require that to really make a customer feel comfortable about buying them. I think we found that it was academically a nice idea. Like to even say it sounds really intuitive. In reality, we found that people did not like the connection of recommendation or expert with the actual transaction itself. Those are supposed to be church and state, and I think it was something that we found out through trial and error.
But on another one, I think with Casper, a lot of the time, like time and place is really important, and there's some things where it just things happen to align, and it worked for us well with Casper, and I'll explain why, but it didn't work for us. Remember, Fun for America. So we were graduating college, and we were going through this problem where we were like, we want to work on something, but we're so broke, and so like, how would we possibly go and try to go out there and raise money? And like the whole idea, like we didn't know any VCs at the time, right? Like maybe we met a couple angel investors here and there, but the original idea was like the crowdfunding movement had just been signed into law. And so we thought, okay, what if we could simultaneously take advantage of that law, create an online crowdfunding platform that would allow like college students to raise money from their friends and family to work on something, but actually get equity in exchange for it, right? So like raise $50,000 or $100,000 from grandma and your cousins, whomever, friends. And we started working on it, and we were just like churning and churning and churning. The problem was this was like 2011 or 2011 up to 2012, and it was just too early, right? Like a lot of the laws were just like not put into place, and it was going to take years for the clearance. And now AngelList and Kickstarter and these things are like hugely successful. And maybe had we kept working on it, like by today, it would have been a reality. But on the flip side, when we started Casper, a lot of magical things seemed to align, right? There was the rise of direct-to-consumer brands, like Harry's and Warby Parker came before us and showed people that like you can actually build massive businesses online or direct-to-consumer first, and people were starting to trust new brands. There was this idea that in the markets, right, and so people often talk about like when's the right time to start a company, and there's probably no real right time, but in 2013, 14, 15, 16, there's a huge upward trend happening where people wanted to invest in brands and companies. And so every time when we'd go out there, we'd have a little bit of traction, and then people were like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then it would get, I don't want to say easier and easier to raise money, but in 2015, where we were at like the height of the market, right, we were able to raise $55 million on amazing terms because that was what everyone was betting on, right? And so I think there's some times where, like the stars align and you can become a beneficiary of it. And it can go both ways, right? Sometimes an idea is just too early for its time.
I think that's an excellent point, because you can have all the stars aligned otherwise. And you may remember our model POCD. And so the C is context.
Yeah.
and context matters a lot. And by definition, it's something you don't control, but you have to operate within. So that's a challenge sometimes. So any other wounds you want to disclose or lessons you want to help share with the folks gathered here about some of the other things you did? I mean, I remember Consign, and I remember some of the other teammates you had. And do you think your intuition that you were discussing before was signaling anything different at the time from what it signaled for Casper? Like you knew it wasn't really as home run as this, or you just didn't know and it had to play itself out?
Yeah, I think two trend lines that have like improved with Casper. I mean, obviously there's pattern recognition, seeing things where you thought you had you thought something was going to play out one way, or you thought you were going to tackle X one way, and over time you just get better at that. I think the thing that we got better with at Casper probably was people, like just the sort of, in some ways it's again like understanding what it means to like manage people as young entrepreneurs without any kind of management background, without any sort of like professionalized training, and I would look at that as like our big. We had 4 or 5 hires at Consign, part-time, 1099 W-2, just trying to figure out how we could script together the ability to do it. At Casper, we built a environment. There were a couple scars along the way, but an environment where a lot of people felt like they were building this. They were contributing like IP and their own ideas, and we were really empowering it at the start. I don't really have a tactical suggestion for how to do it, but that I would attribute a lot of value to for us.
I think you will be hugely surprised if you start a company at how much of what you learn here will be valuable.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Not in the ways you think it's going to, right? So I was a COE major, which is now BEO, I guess, in the biotechnology track. Then I went to med school, and like I thought, okay, cool, I'm gonna like learn how to start a company, and like that. Not to take away from that, like that is very, very important. But a lot of the other stuff is actually incredibly interesting. Like I was on class board, and responsible for trying to figure out how to fundraise, how to put on events, how to manage people, how to manage teams. Like going in front of the UFB every quarter made my stomach, crunch up on the inside. But that was my first experience in like learning how to manage a budget and how to manage people, large teams of people. In sociology classes and in cognitive and behavioral science classes, we learned about managerial decision making, right? And how to organize groups of people and how to think about expected value. And like actually in medical school, one of the most important things I learned was how to interview people, right? And so you learn how to talk to people and get them to tell you things that they normally don't want to tell anyone, because normally it's a very awkward conversation with a physician because you don't want to disclose that you're having back pain or something's going on with you. And so it's not like I could have said along that whole journey, like I'm picking these skills up so that one day I can start a company, but like having a varied set of experiences will definitely create those kinds of skills one day where you'd be surprised at how you can tap into them. And like the other thing is like the cool thing about Brown is it's one of those places where it's like being part of a startup, right? There's no idea here that if you want to do, you can't figure out a way to make happen, right? Like I remember we'd have crazy ideas and I would just email. Like one time we got invited to this conference with this nonprofit I was working on in Paris, and it was going to cost like $10,000 for us to go, and it was in a week. It was like the World Innovation Summit. And I was like, okay, we've got to figure out a way to how to get there. And I just like emailed 20 deans and said, I need $1,000 to be able to go to this. And if you don't give it to me, I'm going to show up at your doorstep tomorrow morning and beg you for it. And you know what? Eventually I got like 10,000 from that, and I got like another 5,000 from President Simmons at the time. And like, it's just a straight hustle, right? Like eventually, if you bang down enough doors, you will figure out how to make it happen. And Brown is the kind of place that supports that, and at least won't hopefully throw you out. So, and that works in the real world too. When we raised our seed round, we found out the rapper Nas was starting to invest, and so we said, okay, like it'd be really cool to get Nas into our seed round, but like none of us obviously knew Nas, right? And so we just like did it, Googled and guessed a bunch of random email combinations for his manager, sent his manager a cold email saying, I know you've never heard of us, and I know it sounds like we're starting a mattress company, but I promise this is going to be something super interesting. Will you take a meeting? And they took the meeting and then wrote a check like 24 hours later because they said, wow, this actually sounds super cool. And then Nas became one of our investors. And so, if you just put your mind, and it's not always going to work, right? But if it works like 1 out of 20 times, the expected value can be pretty good that like something magical can happen.
So his nickname was Dr. Discount when we first started because I called out his email writing skills as a real thing because it really has moved and changed the way our business has existed. Just literally that act of defaulting to sending rather than defaulting to not even writing an email. I can't overstate how much stuff has come to Casper that we wouldn't have had if it weren't for just that like almost like attitudinal fault or win that's in Neil's way of doing things.
You're saying I'm shameless.
Yeah. But the Dr. Discount thing was because Neil would everything from subscription for Salesforce, which is like big company, super expensive to do it, and it's like we probably just net it out because of Neil's email spending 40% less on any given startup starting cost because the email of asking for a discount. Like we're just starting. This is something will be a long-term. Like you probably had these templatized emails to send. I mean, I'm sure you do have templatized emails, but they work, and it's like email as as like gasoline for getting us to go.
I think the other point is whom you select as your co-founders will be the single most important decision I think anyone will ever make. I mean, it's kind of like getting married, right? And the problem is when you start a company, you can't even really get divorced. You're kind of like stuck with those people for a pretty long time. And so, we were very lucky. Like we've been friends now for like 9 or 10 years, and have ended up doing a bunch of projects together. I'm sure we'll do lots more together in the future. But that relationship and that trust that you have between people is so important. And like at the beginning, the reason like we were able to go from idea to launch in like 6 months or 7 months, including raising money and that stuff, is that we had this team that like was in a state of flow. And like as crazy as that sounds, like we just said, Jeff, okay, go off and run and deal with the product. Neil, go run off and deal with operations. Gabe and Luke, figure out the brand and build the website. And it just like went. And we didn't have to go and like turn this into a democracy where on every little thing we were asking, going up to a vote, it just like kind of worked. And that in many ways it happened because, we'd found the right chemistry with the right group of people and that we inherently very much trusted them. And it's why we still work together today.
Is it a team that reconstituted itself from a prior working relationship, or these are just people anew from?
3 out of 5 came from Consign. Also the Brown grads, and the other 2 are new.
Yeah.
So at least a core of the team had some prior experience. You knew kind of your style of working there.
I know how to push Luke's buttons.
Well, 2 of the themes that I detected related to the experience at Brown were one, what I hope accurately describe as liberal arts, because you were talking about how you can't directly tie the skill set you were learning in an IR class, or in my case, like history, to exactly what you were doing. You're not going to write a 5-page paper about Edmund Burke and the French Revolution at Casper, but there nevertheless are some skills that you could draw on from your liberal arts experience here. And the other is the breadth of experience, and I'd say that's a theme we hear pretty regularly from other guests who've been with us. Steph Corey from Away was here a few weeks ago. Many of you heard her speak. She reflected very positively on her experience at Casper, by the way. And when she was asked about how her Brown experience tied so nicely to what she's doing now, she said she took a very wide range of courses to learn a very wide range of experience, skills, and have a wide range of experiences. It sounds like that's partly what you're saying as well. Breadth. You could have some depth, but it's more the breadth probably that sounds reasonable. And then the other is relationships. And I always say, look at the people sitting next to you, your friends, and those are perhaps people who could be co-founders in a new venture. You know them. The risk involved in starting something versus starting something with people you have no prior experience with is pretty starkly different.
Yeah, I was going to say a couple of things that that surprised me after graduating. The first one is it's harder to make friends after you graduate. It actually is. I mean, we have maybe the experience of New York City in that little bubble, and so I'll caveat that that's the bubble experience. It's the nature of your friendship when you exist in the professional world and how those are formed are different. And not to say you can't make friends. You absolutely can. I just think it's again, it's like one of the assets that you come from this environment afterwards. That's an obvious asset to starting a company. The second thing I was going to say was, I think if you actually I don't think there's ever been a better time from a social currency, downside protection to starting a company than right now. In the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a couple structural benefits. Obviously, if you want to start e-commerce, there's things like Shopify, which allow you to do it out of your dorm without having to build any of the stuff that we had to build. And it's just that seems like as a trend line, it's easier and easier to play. But I also think that this is at least my point of view. If you were to fail having given something a shot in today's job market, and you were able to, there's a lot of challenges and a lot of luck that we had the $5,000 check to move to New York City. Both of us were fortunate to not have to deal with student loans. So there was a lot of benefits that we had going into this. But if we'd failed, and we did sort of fail with Consign, and we chose to do Casper afterwards, it was abundantly clear that the year that we devoted to Consign would have been equivalent to 2+ years in being a peon at another startup. Working for a Facebook or Google. And I think that's what's amazing about this is it's like there's not really, it's almost like a responsibility of our generation to recognize that we have a much easier time to do this from a downside standpoint than certainly your generation, my father's generation, and folks before.
Last question. How many of you guys are thinking about starting a company at some point? Wow, that's a lot. That's awesome. I think it was very different probably 5 years ago and very, very different. And so there are, tying onto Luke's point, so many resources available today to make that easier, and the risk is actually a lot lower than ever. And the other thing I'd say is as you're thinking about whether or not you start a company now or you end up going and working somewhere, the best piece of advice I ever got was find a place where either the opportunity is really special or something special is really going on that you can learn from. Because the difference between a top 1% company or experience and everything else is enormous. Right? I think there's an order of magnitude difference. And if you have the opportunity to go into a super fast growing company as someone early, I'm saying if you don't start a company, first you should try to start a company, right? But if you're a little bit more risk averse, the things that you can learn from a place where there is something that is working, right? Whether it's the chemistry or it's the group of people or it's the product market fit, that is so hard to replicate. And so if you can get inside and observe and figure out whoa, how is the crystal ball on the inside working? It will be just such an incredible experience. And I think you'll end up learning quite a bit more than going and doing an analyst program somewhere. Not to knock those things; those can be great learning experiences in general management.
Go and knock.
But fight for those opportunities, right? A lot of times the best jobs out there are the ones that don't exist today. You're going to go to a startup that's 20 people and say, I know you don't have any jobs open. I will work for free for 2 weeks and prove to you how I'm going to add value to you, or fight your way in, or figure out some angle to get in, right? There's the passive approach, which is I'm just going to apply to McKinsey and Google and hope that come interview day, they're going to give me an interview. Or there's the active approach, which is what are the 10 most interesting things going on in the world? Right now, I actually really want to learn about blockchain and Bitcoin and stuff, right? And so go find go to Consensus or go to some of these companies where they're doing really cool, interesting stuff, and go and learn about it if you care about that, right? And figure out on the early stage how to get in, because for us it was direct to consumer in many ways, whether it's in biotechnology or whatever it is. Getting on the ground floor can be enormously helpful to both your career and figuring out what the next 50 years of a certain industry are going to be like, and you don't want to miss that. So Sorry.
I want to,
Tangent.
no, it's great. I love that. I'm sure lots of people here love that. We build this as a fireside chat. There's no fireside, but we want to make sure this is a bit of an interactive chat. So I want to encourage anybody who's interested in asking a question to use the mics, just because we're also filming it. So if you don't mind walking up to the mic, and while you're, just go up to the mic, and then we'll see how many we can get through. Yes. If you don't mind, tell us who you are.
Hi, Dave Barral. I'm a plastic surgeon in Providence. I went to Brown Medical School.
Cool.
You mentioned your R&Ds in San Francisco. Where do you do your manufacturing, and how did you set that up?
Sure. So at the beginning, the manufacturing is mostly done in the U.S. It's the mattresses, at least, are made in Atlanta, Georgia, and outside of LA. And at the beginning, we had no experience here, and so we just cold emailed 20 contract manufacturers and said, hey, I see that you make mattresses online. Will you take a meeting with us? One of them replied. We flew down to meet them. It turned out they happened to be the best manufacturer of specialty foams in the world. And we developed this amazing relationship. And when they were getting 30,000 mattress orders from Serta Simmons, they ended up working with us to prototype, because they must have seen some little spark of something in it. And they invested quite a lot of time and energy into helping us out at the beginning. But we didn't really know anyone in that space. And so it again came down to just like banging down doors and trying to convince someone that this could be big. And the lesson I think we learned from it is that you have to portray a really big vision, because no one else is ever going to think, or very rarely are people going to think that your vision is bigger than you portray it to be, right? Like if you have an idea for a device or whatever it might be, if you could show people that it actually could be all of this stuff, and there's like a reasonable way for that to happen, then suddenly people's wheels start going and they go, oh wow, like this isn't just gonna be a 5-bed-a-day mattress company, like this could be the next Nike one day, and like I wanna get on the ground floor of it, and then you get them excited and they wanna help you.
Cool. Hi, my name is Aaron. I'm a senior. I'm studying philosophy, and I love the point you said about the cold emails, and especially about consensus, because I just cold emailed the COO yesterday asking for a job, and she just responded this morning very enthusiastically. So go consensus and blockchain, and also go cold email. My question is, naming is very important. Often it's a little struggle, and finding the right name when it clicks, it's amazing. Mark Twain said the difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between lightning and a lightning bug. And I think that's very true. Casper, how did you arrive at that name, and why?
That was a really painful process for us. It's funny because there's an alternative view that naming's, it's like, as long as you're within a sweet spot of like a pretty good name, that it's kind of what you make of it, and that's what there's a lot of our branding partners would have that point of view. I think we did get lucky with our name. It's my co-founder Gabe, who's the other guy from Brown, named it after my roommate Casper with a K, who was a guy who was too long for his bed. But the backdrop to this was we were going through a naming process. We'd spent like 9 weeks on it. We were originally called Duke, as like there's a queen size mattress, a king size mattress, and there's like a Rogue Duke. It was way too masculine. That would have been a failed name. But we chose Casper because it's a little bit abstract in that it's not a direct correlation to mattresses. It has a warm and fuzzy feeling for our generation to do with the night and obviously the ghost, but we never talk about the ghost as part of it. And the second thing is it's personified. I think that's now too much of a trend, so I wouldn't name companies after people's names right now for consumer, because I think it feels like too of the moment. But when we did it, it was a little earlier, and I think the benefit is that you kind of get this sort of personification when you're in your social media and all those other things, where it's sort of like brand as personality, which is good.
Hi. So I was wondering, like, especially at the beginning, how did you make mattresses sexy? So how did you get people excited? Like you said, it's just a mattress business, but I swear it's going to be interesting. So once you're pitching it, either to your friends or people you want to join your team or investors, what story did you tell, and what vision did you kind of bring forward?
One of the things I'll say is we invest a lot in design early on. A lot of companies wait till after they've started to do that. I think that's a mistake. I think it's actually like one of the highest ROI investments you can make for early stage startups. I think the cool thing that Casper did was we leaned into the controversy of what we're doing. So we very much went full steam ahead on the idea of a one-size-fits-all, one perfect mattress communication strategy, which if you think about it, it's like that's against what the status quo is. It has this kind of I say it has free energy because people are willing to learn why, or try and hear your evidence for this to be true, and that gives you that much more attention span. I think it enters conversation more as a differentiated thing versus what's out there. And so I attribute a lot of our success with the press, which then has the effect of people sharing articles and all that other stuff, a lot to us having a controversial positioning early on. And I would highly advise starting with the most controversial thing and leaning into it rather than hiding it with a new company.
But then also going after the higher order purpose, right? We also show people that like we know it's a mattress now, but eventually it's going to be about sleep, right? And like there are steps to get to that point. Like we have to start with a mattress and kill that, but that in the grand scheme of things, we're not here to build the next Tempur-Pedic. We're here because we can actually change the way people think about rest and their next day and their creativity and all the other things that come along with it. And like that higher order purpose motivates people a lot more than just some hacked economics that are interesting about a business.
Hi, my name is Imani. Thanks again for coming here. I'm kind of curious what kept you going when you were like low on funds. Your parents probably thought you were crazy and like your ideas weren't working out. Like what kept you going for like a few years?
I think it's your friends. In our context, we had that. I think it's a lot. My brother's starting a company is on his own, and his lows are lower than they are when you have kind of that averaging support factor of working with your friends. So for me, it's a simple answer.
Yeah. We got very lucky.
Hi, Nate Asberg. I'm in Professor Warshay's Engine 1010 class currently. I'm a junior at Brown. And my question is, how, as an early startup, do you fundraise for R&D? More specifically, how do you convince an investor to put money towards your business maybe before you have an actual product? And then how do you convince that investor you'll be able to protect that product from competition down the road?
I don't know. I mean, for us, there was some defensibility because the way we manufacture the mattresses was interesting, and we helped develop a lot of the technology. But we were basically maxing out our credit cards until someone came along. Like we took probably 60 or 70 investor meetings until someone came along and said, yes, we'll give you some money. And even then, it was still hard. So I think what it was we really focused on was the big consumer value proposition. Like this industry is broken, better products and better services in it can be really interesting. And like to some extent the investor like that helped us raise money, and then we funneled most of it into R&D, but the sell to investors wasn't that like, hey, we're gonna go and do research and build something. It was really around like, hey, this can be a really interesting business. It does require this piece of it. But that the business is interesting and we're the team that can figure it out.
We only have a few more minutes, so I'm going to see if we can rapid fire through a few questions quickly.
Quickly then. Can you speak to how the practice of starting those 5 companies before helped you when you got to Casper?
I would just say, to keep it fast, I think the one cool thing about Casper that we recognized as an opportunity when we were evaluating what we wanted to do after recognizing our previous one wasn't working, was it had the benefits of a lot of focus. Like as a business model, it was one product, one brand, one communication strategy. And so if you think of your bandwidth as a team, we were able to take all of our learnings and sort of like point them like laser beams into making everything we did 99th percentile. Our prior company had a lot more things that had to go right to achieve what you'd call like the minimum viable product of it. With Casper, it was really basic. It was entering a space where we knew the demand existed, we knew people wanted it, and the hurdle was so low that you had this like clear opportunity to change stuff. So I look at it as like how it was different as a business to those last ones, the reason why we did it.
Thank you.
Hi, I just wanted to know what your aha moment was. Like, were you just having a sleep and thinking, like, it could be better?
I think with the inspiration came from our co-founder Philip, who had actually sold, like he had a mattress company before this, and he had sold like $70 or $80 million of mattresses from his dorm room, and we went like, like we were sitting here making like $10,000 or $20,000 a month in our e-commerce company. We're like, sorry, what? You sold this from your dorm room and they weren't even like that great? I shouldn't tell them that, but you know, but like, you know, there was just like a real market opportunity. It had partially been validated before.
He did that over 10 years.
Yeah.
Which was the different one for me. That sounds like it is a lot of money, but he did it over 10 years and sort of validated there was like a floor that as long as we out-executed that floor, he'd actually started a different business because that business had sort of gone flat. It was not making money. It was not anywhere near as healthy, and so he was a little bit jaded by mattresses. But we saw what other folks were doing in other categories, and so that was I think an aha moment was, you know, this exists, and we can add a layer of communication on top that at the worst case is jumping the current hurdle.
Hi, okay. So my question is, so you didn't know anything about the mattress industry, you didn't know about how to make mattresses. How did you go about convincing people that your mattress is going to be better than mattresses available? Like, why? What about yours made it different than others?
Yeah. We actually, the big thing we did was we gave a 100-night trial, and we really like pushed that trial as part of our communication. It was sort of like, we're so confident in this product, you can try it for 100 nights, and we'll pick it up and refund you everything. And we just stuck to that. We'd even sent emails saying, how are you liking your mattress, which is, you know, it's one of those things where that's a perverse incentive because you normally will just like try and, you know, remove the chance that you might prompt someone to return it. We made that communication for us a primary part of take it or leave it, so they would actually learn to like it. And then people's referral drove the success from there.
Hi, you mentioned 1 year of med school. I'm curious about your decision to leave, or if you have any advice to people deciding between entrepreneurship and finishing med school or grad school.
Yeah. I feel very grateful. Well, I'll start with this. I feel very grateful to have had the opportunity to go to med school. I learned a lot, and at the time, it didn't feel like it. Like I felt like I was just being forced to memorize a lot of stuff and not ask questions. But looking back on it, like there is definitely some validity to like learning the work ethic. Like for me, Brown undergrad was like very, very easy on workload, and then med school was like a harsh reality into like what it's like to work 100 hours a week, which I did not have to do before. So I think you learn lessons and things no matter what. For me, it was a lot more pull factor than push factor. Like I definitely could have finished medical school. Luke was graduating college. We had been sitting at the bottom of the English Tavern or whatever it's called over there at that time, like, brainstorming ideas because our mind would just always go to that place. And when him and Gabe said, hey, we're gonna move to New York and try something, I had like a summer off and I said, you know what, like I might as well just go and try it. And like I ended up just having so much fun having, open boundaries and just being able to work on anything that I didn't end up going back. And there was a hard time, like after the end of the first or second year, the med school was like, hey, like you really have to tell us if you're coming back or not. And I don't know, it was just like a gut instinct. It felt like there was a right time, the right place, something interesting was happening, and I knew that it was like, it's kind of like dating. When you like meet the right people, they're the right people. And for me, I knew it was going to be hard to meet other co-founders that I had that kind of chemistry with, and so I just wanted to keep working with them.
Hi, my name is Maverick, and just because you mentioned blockchain, I'm going to shamelessly plug a new free educational resource for people who want to learn about cryptocurrencies and invest themselves. It's called BitBuddy, bit-buddy.com. And I want to ask about internal management. You're talking about, you co-founded this with all your buds, and in a lot of eyes of entrepreneurs, that's a big no-no because tensions will arise and this should be a strictly business relationship. I want to ask about how do you kind of keep this good, positive internal company culture while still making those kind of ruthless decisions and being extremely efficient?
I have a short answer to that, which is of the 5, we chose a boss in Philip. And I say a boss, an end decision maker. So the clarity of when you have a sort of like a little bureau of people where there's no kind of clear end decision maker, you actually just try to, we did this in our prior company, it can feel good and consensus can feel good, but you start to take less risks because you don't have this sort of final dialectic, this is right or this is wrong function in it. And so with Casper, because we knew we have a person in the end is going to have to make final decisions if there's a head-to-head, it'll let us come up with strategies that were far more risky as provocations, if you will, because you weren't sort of as an idea generator, you weren't, I don't know if this is making sense, but you weren't trying always to like not rock the boat or not, you almost had permission to rock the boat and come up with outrageous things because you had this valve and then decision maker. I think if you are doing something where you're always relying on consensus amongst 5 folks, it sort of like leads to a lower risk, lower chance to take, come up with ideas that are interesting.
Any advice to find the individual who should fulfill that role?
For a CEO, so to speak. I think for Philip, what's great about the way he, ultimately now leads a 350-person company is if you look at it as like waveforms, a lot of the rest of the team is able to do like these pretty wild swings and look at different things that we can do. I think Philip is this level-headed, kind of like a computer that looks at it surveys what opinions are and what viewpoints are, and makes very just meritocratic decisions on those, rather than being kind of you often hear celebrated CEOs who are it's their way or the highway and everybody just gets below it. Philip in some ways is the one who is naturally the CEO because he has this dynamic of hearing out everybody and then making a decision that everyone feels invested in. I don't know if you add to that.
Yeah.
So let's try to squeeze in one last quick question and then we'll wrap up.
My name's Aaron. I'm a senior also in Danny's class. I want to ask a really important question. Casper is on American Airlines, and I'm sure students want to know when are Casper mattresses coming to Brown?
If you guys plug it with the
we'll make it happen.
We launched a low cost entry level one that's $600 for a queen, and we could sell it to Brown for
at cost.
At cost, we would do it at cost. We might even like lose $1 per mattress to have it. But then you have to have a little promo code next to the mattress.
If you've seen how long it took to renovate the dorms, I'm sure you'll get an answer. We too lived in those dorms, so definitely.
Great. Let's thank our guests for tonight.
Thanks for having us. And we're just Luke and Neil at Casper.com. So if you have any questions, feel free to email us.